Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So, welcome back to part two of the inquiry into oneness, where we are reframing foundational interpretations. So, just a quick recap of the last session. So, what we did was we set up a context into how we are looking into oneness. And I'll start with a fundamental lesson that I've learned in life is to always be present to oneness when dealing with life. You see, Gurmat is a way of being. Gurmat is not a religion. Gurmat is not a system of beliefs. Life is an opportunity for us to face reality and to choose powerful ways of being. And we test out our interpretations of Gurmat in our experience. So if we choose to let go of our crutches and of weak beliefs, of borrowed notions, then we are free to choose to start fresh from first principles. Now, every time things don't seem to align when we are looking at Gurbani and our interpretations in relation to Gurbani, when we go back to Gurbani and things just don't seem to apply, then we must know that it is our interpretation, our model, that is incorrect. But if we return to first principles, to the principle of one and of oneness, then every single day you can be free to see life as fresh and new every day. Just like Sahib Mera, the mastery that guides me, is Neet Nama, always renewed and renewing, and Sada Datar is always fruitful. So practicing this approach will bear fruit always. That's a promise that I can attest to it from my own life. Now, we had shared last time that there is a structure in Gurbani to do with one and of oneness, and that we've put up on the website, which is available in English as well as in Gurmukhi. So one can go there and get what they can. So now this truth lands on us when we are able to see life for what it is. This depiction, the structure of reality posited by Gurbani, we ignore it at our own peril. So many times you'll see that people talk about Gurbani being uninterpretable, that it's a cosmic mystery, etc. When you hear these statements, they may occasionally arise from a true sense of awe and wonder. And if it does, it's beautiful. But a lot of times, it's because the person saying these things lacks depth of experience, and at worst, hasn't put in the work even to understand, let alone experience, the immensity to which Gurbani alludes. So you're welcome to go to the website at your own time and look at the structure, and I hope you'll find value in using it. But today we'll be focusing on the small portion, generally in the dark, because in Gurbani, it is the kalak, the darkness of Maya, that is being talked about, and which is most of where we live in life is within the temporary structures of life and how the world appears and appearances that we deal with and project into the world. And that's the part that's of most concern to us. And that's where we struggle. So it's our sense of the me, the I that I think that I am. While we deal with that, we shall make references to the bigger self, which Gurbani calls Tum. Now, in order to talk about you and me, though, we can't start directly with us. Gurbani begins this framing with the fact that there ever only is the one. Now, you have no doubt heard this or a similar line, and I'll read it out to you. Rova Ram Nikala Paya, Sita Lakshman Vitur Gaya. You've heard this or something related to this. And to a person, you and most will categorically state that this is to do with Hindu mythology. Most of it can just be disregarded. But Gurbani is giving us a different message. We say that this is being used in Gurbani merely as a device. It can be discarded. Really? What is the basis for that belief? I mean, besides you having heard that from pretty much every scholar or pandit of Gurbani, sorry, we don't use that word, our prolific Vicharvan and Kathavachak tell us that these are about Ram, Sita, and Lakshman. But shouldn't someone stop and ask, what does that have to do with me? Or is the suggestion that so much of Gurbani, especially when dealing with these, quote, mythological allusions, stories, and references, are just fluff being used to bring out the one line at the end? Now, it's possible that is the case. Let's grant that. But that shouldn't stop us from digging deeper to see if there is some value in it. Maybe it isn't all fluff. So starting with that, the first thing to note is that most scholars and Kathavachak will agree that Ram is a reference to the one who is Ramaya Hoya, who is immanent, present, and not transcendent. That, in the structure, if you go back to it, was called Par Brahm in Gurbani. Ram is the immanent one. So, by the way, when you are considering everyone and their opinion on Ram, they all virtually agree that Ram is the immanent aspect of the one. So the invitation here is extend that meaning further. So everyone that takes birth comes into the world crying. That is because Ram, who is immanent, is the one taking a new form in the world of Maya, in the temporary state, where it will start being independent, which we think is such a fantastic word. It connotes our separation, our specialness, and so forth. Well, we all come out crying and wailing because separation is traumatic. Also, being ripped apart, being fractured, is not an enjoyable experience. If the one Ram, who is Ramya Hoya and immanent, then isn't it obvious that it is the one that has been born? So stay with me, this is important. The question is, from what? The one is torn from itself, its sense of itself. But before being born, this sense of itself was unified or stitched, which is also called Sita. Now, this truth, do you see it? Do you get it? Is it apparent yet? That is what it means to lakh, lakhana, kehte ne Gurbani vich. And over here, the reference is to Lakhman. Lakhana means janana, takkana, dekhana, to see, to know, to get it, to witness. And this has to do with the man, Lakhman. You see, the Ram, who is within all, suffers the pain of separation from itself. Once the man, which was previously whole, Sita, is fractured into Unaman and Manua. That is how Gurbani refers to these diametrically opposed states of our man. It calls them Unaman Manua, Sunna Samanna, Dubada Durmat Pagi, Kaho Kabir, Anpao Ik Dekhya, Ram Naam Liv Lagi. In Rag Gaudi, Kabir Sahib states that. So that is what this line is saying, is that Ram is crying in pain since after being born into Maya, its previously sense of wholeness of itself, the man is now separated from itself, from its source. The inwardly oriented, which is called Unman in Gurbani, finds itself unperturbed only when the inner duality, the dubida, the durmat, is resolved. It experiences oneness when it is connected to Ram Nam, the immanent being. That is a state that is correlated with empathy and altruistic tendencies. Only it goes to much more sublime depths. But your skeptical mind must ask, is he making all this up? Is it possible that all of those Gyanis were so totally off in their interpretation? Well, that would be a very valid question for you to ask. So how can we be sure? First, word of caution. Don't ever be quick to trust anyone who shows you any one line in Gurbani. Don't ever be quick to trust them. So what do you need to do though? You insist on seeing the Rahau, which is the essence of that Shabad. But when the Rahau is not present, there is usually a party. There is a structure to Gurbani. So hence, to test whether the interpretation makes sense, we should test it against the essence of this Shabad, which actually happens to be in its body. For our interpretation to be right, the body pretty much has to reflect the same essence. So if you are conversant at all with Gurbani, then it should be clear that just as Ram, Sita, and Lakshman are metaphors, so is Kaya and Hans, which the body says are to be united with the source from where they emerged. Right here. Kaya Hans turmel karta likh paya. But the next line is key. The one who is unseen, but the cause of all, becomes evident to the Gurmukh, one who is living enlightened by the Gur, by the technique. Sab mein gupt vartada Gurmukhi pragataya. So this fact is underscored in the final line, which is Sab kich ape aap hai, ape de vadiyai. This fact is underscored when it is saying that it is the one that's all there ever is and playing this game with itself and grants this larger self to itself. So let's be very clear that you and I and everyone we have ever known are all Ram, according to Gurbani, who was within itself and in oneness until it chose to experience in uncountable ways, in novel ways. That is the reason for it to have subjected itself to a fractured self, as that is the only way it could have experienced an other. To have something new is for it to be fractured. That's the only way it could experience. And that is the reason why it's playing this game. And this is also the reason why and where duality arises, the sense of an other, of me as in different from you. It's in the structure of things. That was a lot. So let's have some fun and learn something from Gurbani in the process. We spoke of Ram. Now, question is, how many times does Ram appear in Gurbani? I'll throw some things out for you. You make a guess. Nobody's testing you. 14. Less than 50. 77. Or 110. You've taken your guess. So if you guessed over 100, then you are correct. Only you are short by about 2,000. Since Ram is mentioned in Gurbani over 2,000 times in various forms. So clearly, Ram is a very important concept in Gurbani. It connotes immanence. Clearly, it has to be very important. It's an important signifier. So for context, Hare is mentioned over 9,200 times. So just know these, because again, they are important. A little bit of more fun. You've heard Ram a few times. What about Paramatma? How many times does that occur in Gurbani? Now, if you are thinking quite a lot, because you've definitely heard that term more than most others besides Vaheguru in Gurdwara and by scholars and Kathavachak, if you think Paramatma must come at least as many times as Ram in Gurbani, then you could not be more wrong. But how wrong are you? Paramatma is mentioned in Gurbani exactly 0 times. But then the question is, why is it being used universally by almost everyone speaking of Gurbani or expressing command of its essence? It may have something to do with borrowed knowledge and terminology, which we talked about in the last session, something to watch out for. And it's one of the major pitfalls that have brought us to where we are at. So it also shows us that many of us aren't fully present to the powerful language of Gurbani and of its context. So again, we've got to ask ourselves, the meaning that I'm deriving from Gurbani, what does that have to do with my transformation, of my being in oneness? If it doesn't, then let those tired, weak interpretations fall by the wayside. More importantly, let's start to be conversant with Gurbani. Now in Punjabi, it is called having waqfiyat, being waqf. Waqf, it comes from waqf, which is light in Arabic. Are we in the dark about Gurbani's language and of its context? That's a question we must ask ourselves. Now, last thing about Paramatma is that it's a compound word, so we'll break it up into its component pieces, which is called Sandhi Viched Karana, to break it up. It is broken up into Param and Atma. We won't talk about it now, but please keep it in mind, and we'll come back to it a little later, and it might even be fun. So, Paramatma never occurs in Gurbani, but these 3 words do come in Gurbani: Paratma, Pratma, and Paratam. And each of them occurs only once. And you can read them right here. But as I was telling you, don't let anybody just show you one line. So it would be disingenuous for me to do that. So let's set a context for them. Here it is. The very first one, which is Atma, Paratma, Ekko Kare, Antar ki dubda, Antar mara. What it's talking about is, where is our focus, our inner eye of attention, of our interest, of what has us in life? Now, seeking the state of Simran, it is linked with our interest and our focus. That is termed Pana in Gurbani. Pa Jana. Pa is what we prefer, what we like, what has us, and Jana is for that to come forth. Atma is not who we are. Atma is only our projection. It's our persona. It's a Mayic projection. It's false. It's temporary. It's our image that we present to the world. We prefer for it to be unchanging and fixed. We want to be consistent. We want to tell people that we are smart, we are good, we are wise, and whatever. But for those whom we don't like, we want to see them as dumb, liars, bad, this or that. Again, labels. We talked about it in the last session. But these personalities, we say, they don't change, especially if they're about others we don't like. We say they don't change. But they do. It's evident. People's lives have transformed wholesale. Personality comes from persona. which is a Latin word for an actor's mask. So persona is a mask that we project while playing a role in the world, on the stage that we're at in life. So person and personality are derived from it, and it's all an act. This Atma, Gurbani says, Atma Drava needs to be malleable. Why? Because it's not malleable, it's hard, it's fixed, it's firm. Because that is what we're trying to make it. We're actually spending more and more time for it to be more firm and fixed. But Atma Drava Raha Livalai. That's what Gurbani is pointing us to. So in this way, consistency can actually be unhelpful. This projection, the Atma, once it softens its hold, then our attention can be focused inwards towards our source. Gurbani calls that Mool. There, the Atma and Paratma are unified. And only then is the disease of duality, of difference, it dies within. That's what these lines are saying. Now, this is possible as a result of following the gur, the way, the technique of being in perpetual growth mindset, in a state of vibrance, of taking risks, and being ready to fail. Then the pitfall of time and our limitations do not arrest our growth. Now let's move to the second one, which talks about Acharj Katha Maha Anup Pratma Par Brahm Ka Roop. This is a little understood, but a marvelous distinction, that the Pratma is the manifest form of Par Brahm. Is the transcendent aspect of the one. Transcendent yet immanent. Sargun Sarup. Again, refer to the mapping that we had talked about earlier. Now, the third one in here, which is Attam Chin Parattam Chino Gursangat e Nistara He. There are some things to note about this. This is the persistent, repetitive instruction to my wayward man, which is inebriated with Maya. It is to stay focused within my true home, from where I am to reside and from where I am to rise in this world. It is that home which sustains me. It is to be consistently focused upon the immanent nature of the one, and to recognize that one whose personification I am. Now, when I'm uncovering the existential suchness of one, of Ram, and over here talks about Ram Naam Jap Gurmukh Jire E Param Tat Vichara Hai. When I'm uncovering this existential suchness of the Ram Naam, the being of being what? Immanent. That is the highest essence that I need to forever keep in my chit, in my attention. And by constantly dwelling within, I get the mystery of the outward facing, the Mayic persona. By being connected with and by befriending this technique, this good, I find a way to not be drowned within the daily expression of Maya. That was a lot. But hopefully you got the irrefutable essence related to all forms of these words, Atma and Pratma. Therefore, it would be useful to understand how these fit within Gurbani. Okay, a lot going on the screen, so we're going to try to make sense out of this. The first major thing to note about this is there are two orientations. One is facing inwards, and the other is externally oriented. The one that is facing inwards, we call live Nal Jodna, which came before. And the other one is Maya oriented. Those are called Baharmukhi. Now, Atma, Brahma, Kabira, all of these are Maya oriented. They're outward facing. And When they're interfacing, we call them Brahm and Atam and Kabir. And what's the difference? It's a kanna. No, in Gurbani, that is how it's the difference is connoted. That when it's in Maya, in the Mayic projection, it's connoted with the kanna. So the difference is not just the kanna, of course. It has a huge impact in our life. And frankly, if you speak Punjabi, it shows up in vernacular when we are addressing a smaller entity, a smaller person, for instance, younger person. We will refer to that as Nanak is Nanaka. When we are addressing a smaller, weaker expression, we put a kanna at the end. So, but this connection had not been made by most. And this distinction is through Such Code Academy, through Dharam Singh, and indebted to him for that. The other obvious thing we notice is that these are antonyms. They're actually opposites, and maybe better viewed as two sides of the coin, except one is real and authentic, and the other is inauthentic and fake. So if you're conversant with Gurbani, you should also be familiar with these specific terms that come up, like Ram Naam Atam Mein Sudh Hai. Atma Ram Pachaniya. It's not Atma Ram Pachaniya. It's not Ram Nam Atma Mein Sudh Hai, because Atma is the outward projection. If we're going to look for Ram Nam to earn that distinction, it's going to be inside. It's in the Atam Mein Sudh Hai. So hopefully that is starting to make some sense. And the other thing that I want you to notice is when these inner and the outer come together, when the Atam and the Atma, or Brahm and Brahma come together, actually more apt is Brahm and Brahma, it becomes Puran Brahm. And even in language, it's literally like whole, becoming whole. Puran Brahm, when it comes together. And when it comes together, it is still within the sphere. How does it reach the state of Par Brahm? Par Brahm is to transcend what Puran Brahm was dealing with. When it transcends, it gets into the state of Par Brahm. That's, again, a structure. So we'll just move forward and just make sure that we nail this down, we really understand it. So this is showing the use of antonyms to bring out some larger truths. Atma, again, is Atam or Par Atma. That's the antonym. And as we've attempted to show you here, if you merely put a par in front of a word, that also makes it its opposite, its antonym. So for Atam, the antonym is Par Atam. Just as much as for Atam, it's Atma. That is how this makes sense. Now, for instance, Atma, the Mayic projection, if you put Par in front of that, it actually negates that. So it becomes the inner. It becomes Paratma. And it's actually talking about the inner. I hope that comes very clear. Just by putting the Par in the front of Atma, which was on the Maya, the side of the Maya, the outward orientation, it actually connotes the inner orientation. And that is a little bit of math that we have to do to understand that it's actually very apparent. And Pratma is merely shortening Par to Pra. It's same as Pratma. So hopefully that is becoming fairly evident how in Gurbani these usages of the word and what they connote comes forth. Now, most of us also remember in Gurbani, in Asa Ki War, which if you go to your local Gurdwara, you'll hear on most mornings, there's a line, Ek Krishnang Sarb Deva, Dev Deva Ta Atma. The next line is also very telling, which is read by a lot of people that interpret it to mean something totally different and actually makes the meaning doesn't come forth, doesn't shine through. It says Atma, they call it Vasudevas, but it's not. It's Basudevas. Bas is smell, which has to do with our senses, which has to do with Maya. These are endemic to Maya. So these are about our outward facing man, the Atma, right? Or as it says, Paratam. So Atma Basudevasa. That means it's within the control. It is caught within boss, which is Maya. If you understand this riddle, if you get this mystery, Jeko jane peo, so we must get it. But our problem is that we are not getting it. And Bhagat Ravdas says, Madhave, kya kahiye? Brahm aisa. Jaisa maniye, hoye na taisa. That whatever we think it is, the way the reality is, the world is, it isn't. It ain't what I thought it was. And that's the struggle that we are facing in life, is dealing with reality can be fairly shocking to our senses and to our way of being. Because we are as though asleep. We are sovereigns asleep and thinking we are beggars. We don't know from where we come. But if we are to deal in a way, what way would it be that we should deal? How do we play in this illusory game of Maya? Well, it is to bring unto oneness these two sides of the coin, the Atma and Paratma. Then we shall find that the duality and its disease will die within. Atma Paratma eko kare, antar ki dubida antar mere. Then Gurbani repeatedly tells us that I am imprisoned and its game is to set us free. Band khalasi pane hoye. Everybody should remember these lines. But what does that mean? That I first need to see that I am imprisoned. I am band. And I need to be free, to be khalasi. But I can only be that when I'm in pana. But this is a persistent problem. This pane hoye. Like, how do I get to be pane hoye? It seems out of touch. It's like we discussed. It is because Atma, our projection, our Maya projection, our world, the person that we think we are, which we are not, but we think we are, it is caught up in this Maya projection. We are enjoying ourselves in Maya way too much, and we're not getting this mystery. So before we leave this and move on to the next, it should be evident that Atma is our man that is outward oriented, not live oriented, not inwards. It is lost in ignorance and it's deluded within Maya. So the question then is, if that is Atma, then what does Paramatma mean? And remember, Param and Atma make Paramatma. Paramatma. And if Atma is deluded, then isn't Paramatma the highest delusion? And that is the word that everyone seems to be using for the one. We really are not conversant with Gurbani. So now that you're getting more familiar with the fundamental distinctions and terminology that is used in Gurbani, so more importantly, as you start to retrain yourself in the way you approach Gurbani and Gurmat, let's take some instruction from Gurbani regarding its own context. It will also underscore the model we are using to interpret oneness from the riddles that are commonplace in Gurbani. Gurbani calls those bujharta and repeatedly asks us that we bujh them, inspiring and challenging us with Jeko bujhe if one were to solve these riddles. What is left unsaid is that you need to do this for yourself. Your work does not stop by taking the fruits of someone else's hard work. You have to earn it and implement it yourself. Now we shall look to clear up the use of Brahm and of Bichar, because that is what Gurbani says it is. Gurbani says that it is Brahm Bichar. We are singing it melodically and thinking that the singing it has some magical property. It does not. For instance, I can learn to sing Greek melodies with the deepest mysteries. It's not a mantra that will get me to a result just by repetition or singing, even beautifully. No, I need to relate with the words They need to be mine from my core. I have to feel them. I have to own them and be led by them. Then the singing is real and joyful and profound. Else, it's just like a parrot or a recording device, which is not transformed by the words because they have no impact on its being. So, in the first one, Rahao, everybody's familiar with, who's been listening to Gurbani for a while. Saval Sundar Ramaya, Mera Man Laga Tuhe. Now, the first thing you should note is that Ram is in there as well, right? So, this is Kabir Sahib in Gaudi. It's an Ashtapadi. It says that Gurbani is not a song, but that it is Brahm Bichar. Log jane ek geet hai. Ye to Brahm Bichar. It is the exploration and revelation of the inner, the hidden and larger truth and reality of existence. Now, the second one, this is a truth validated by Guru Arjan Sahib in Asa, when he says that Nanak is one who knows. How do we know? Jan Nanak bole. Nanak is the one who knows. Jande ne. That's why he's Jan. He knows what he's presenting as he has practiced it in his being. And he's enlightened with his practice. Practice of what? Practice of universal wisdom. Udi gal ho rahi hai Satgur. Durjan mare vari sanghare Satgur moko hare naam devaya. By practicing the universal wisdom, and what he speaks is Brahm Bichar, the wisdom that is only possible to be known internally. Now, let's come to Guru Arjan Sahib in Ramkali. He tells us how to be in the state of oneness. And according to him, if we were to engage in Brahm Bichar, then we step into the possibility of operating from a most elevated state. It's a state of being. And that state of being is that of a devoted lover. It is underscoring. In the second one, he talked about Suno Loka Main Prem Ras Paya. Is talking about Prem Ras, the intensely tasteful, the taste of love. That is what all devotees want. The Prem Ras of that. He says he found it. And says that that Ras, the marvelous taste of oneness, is present only in total immersion. Immersion when? Let's read it. ऐसा समर्थ हर जियो आप निमक ना बिसरै जी भगतन कै आठ पहर मन ताको जाप. Not even for an instant am I broken from that. I am in it, in that state 24/7 of the man, and it is within what? Brahm Bichar. Bichare koe Nanak ta ki param gati hoye. Then they will find the highest state of being. How? If they're engaged in Brahm Bichar. So hopefully we brought out in a strong way the distinctions and the structure from within Gurbani that talk about an Unman and a Manua, the one that is facing outwards and the one that is facing inwards. Unman being the inner, Manua being the outer, because again it has a Kanna, just like Kabira and Atma. So the other distinction we brought out is that Gurbani is Brahm Bichar, which also tells you that what we were talking about, the model of Brahm and Brahma, Brahm being the inner, it's very consistent. And again, because I brought out 3 examples for you doesn't mean that there were 3 examples. There were actually a lot more. We chose these because there was a continuity that brought out the message. So what we shall do in the next session is build upon these distinctions which are essential. But why? See, we set a context, we've made certain structural understandings, but how do we live with this in life? Gurbani speaks about that as well. It talks about the live orientation, the inner orientation. We're concerned a lot with knowledge, but wisdom, gyan. Which gyan? How do we deal with oneness as reality? How do I enter oneness? What are the obstacles that I'll be facing in that process? And most importantly, these are not theorizing. This is not about theories, one model or the other. It's really about experience. We must experience. Now, nobody can give that experience. We can hardly even talk about it effectively. So if the experience is on each of us, but what Gurbani tells us, by the way, is to be in a state of vibrance. That is also the connotation of Hari, Hari Ahoya, greenness, growth, and vibrance, which comes 9,287 times in Gurbani. So we shall end this session here and look forward to seeing you again in the next one, where we talk about practicing of oneness. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.